I am Piers Ridyard, CEO of the decentralized finance protocol Radix, a public ledger entirely focused on bringing DeFi into the mainstream. This is our podcast, the DeFi Download, a show about decentralized finance and all things crypto, where we dive into the details of the projects, assets, and services that are powering the DeFi revolution. Today, I am joined by Lorien, co-founder of Figment. Figment Networks provides infrastructure services for proof-of-stake networks. For token holders, they provide staking services, and for developers, they provide API services that make it easier to build against these networks. The vision behind Figment is to try and create a better internet by increasing the use of blockchain and blockchain technology. Lorien, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity, and good to meet you.
So you guys have been in blockchain for a while now, right?
Well, usually, very often when people ask this question, you get an answer about, I've been mining Bitcoin since, 2012. In our case, we're actually a little bit late arrival. So we launched the company in 2018. We have, 25 years of internet infrastructure experience, going back to sort of pre-browser in the early 90s. When we started our first ISP company in Canada. But we launched in 2018, and one of the reasons we ended up in staking was because that was an area that we thought, other than having lots of sort of intellectual interest in the area, was one way that we could sort of get into the ground level and be the first people who are scaling around proof of stake. So kind of 3 years. There's lots of people who would like to point out that they've been doing things much longer. So I don't want to overrepresent there.
I mean, 2018 is an interesting year to get into it because that was sort of like post the 2017 crash. What was it about? Like, so someone who created an ISP. How do you see like the comparison between the early days of the internet and what's happening now in blockchain?
Yeah, so great question, because I think there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of sort of commonality and contrast. So, we started our first company in the early 90s. This is our fourth company together. The co-founders. So we've been fighting and getting along and building things for a long time. And we started an ISP and then a data center and then cloud security. So we've kind of every sort of major big change or next big thing we've gotten in early and then figured out a way to commercialize it. But with the first, I don't know how many people here remember having their first email address or dialing in with an old modem. But the original days of the internet, there was just a massive, email was such a transformational way to communicate at scale that there was instant use case for the internet. No one doubted that email was something like that. Right. That itself was just, and so people would line up. You couldn't pay by credit card really because there was no way to take payments online at that time. So you would show up at the office, and there would be literally it was a movie theater, and people were very, very hungry to just give me an internet connection so I can go to the few websites there are and send email, because that was sort of transformational. And so, I don't know if it's actually been replicated in any of our subsequent infrastructure businesses, just from the sheer sort of the novelty of that and the changes that makes in people's lives. And so everything there's been varying levels of success, but just that, from the average person on the street wanting to interact, I don't think that, we've seen that. Now, there's lots of interest in growth in blockchain. Obviously, that's why we're here, but it's a more complicated technology. It's harder for some people, your average person walking on the street, to actually sort of see how it applies to them, although that's, changed a lot in the last 3 or 4 years. So
that's really interesting, because I often talk about you guys are also part of GoodFi, the GoodFi Alliance, with the sort of mission to get 100 million users into DeFi, 100 million users to put $1 into DeFi by 2025. Right. And the whole thing I always talk about that is the early days of the internet, you had to convince people to get an internet connection. You had to convince people to buy a computer in many cases. And then you had to people then had to learn how to use this new piece of technology, the internet browser. And I always say that I wasn't there.
You had to install, it was worse than that you had to install special software to allow your computer to talk to a phone, to talk to the internet.
Right.
it was even more basic than that. It wasn't just, like you plug in now. There was a whole set of UX. We spent more time in that business helping people literally like attach to their phone line and connect to something called the internet than anything to do with the actual internet. So it was even that, when you talk about UX issues in crypto, I mean, it was very, very difficult,
Right.
originally to do anything for your
Right,
average consumer.
and I think that's sort of like got a lot of similarity with crypto now, in that like the idea of earning cryptocurrency is super alien to people. The idea of having a cryptocurrency wallet and having to be responsible for a bunch of extra layers of security that people just aren't used to, not having the safety net of having just someone they can call up and say, I've lost my my username and password, and then this whole idea of then interacting with Web3 applications. I wasn't there at when the internet was being created, but it feels like those were hard things as well.
Yeah, there is something similar in kind of like the first time you sent or received an email. I will say, now that you sort of raised it, there is a similar feeling. Like the first time you either sent a stablecoin or Ethereum or Bitcoin to a friend from your ledger or from a MetaMask wallet, and there's no one in between that transaction, or more so trading, doing a swap using MetaMask, for example, there's almost, that's the closest thing I can see. Like, wow, what is this? There's no one telling me, taking a fee. I don't have to wait for anything. There's no large central authority in this transaction that may only be $5 or could be 50,000. And that's kind of amazing that you can transfer value that way or exchange value that way without having an intermediary. Like, leaving aside whether the intermediary is bad or good, or it's almost like a slightly religious experience, similar to like sending and receiving your first email. I think you're like, wow, this just happened. I'm not like waiting for mail to arrive. It's quite amazing. I think the first time you do that.
So for me, like I think sending a transaction on a crypto network was cool. Like I did like that, although always convincing my friends that yes, you should take Bitcoin or you should take Ethereum. Like I've got screenshots from like one of my friends. I forced him to take Bitcoin in like 2015 because we went out and had dinner, and I was like, I've got to pay you. I'm going to pay you in Bitcoin. And he never spent it, and he sent me a screenshot, and it's now like worth stupid money now.
Yeah. Well, it's even better. Usually they've lost the keys in that interim. It's even worse. So, yeah, you can laugh back, but that's good. They didn't do that. So.
But for me, the thing that I loved, that I've loved the most recently, is this way that DeFi is essentially single sign-on finance, right? Like that you have a MetaMask wallet, and you can go and move your money between, like, I was in Uniswap and now I'm in SushiSwap and now I'm in Aave, and like just being able to do that and never have to fill in a form again, like that for me was much more of a this is so clearly the future than just sending a transaction to someone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even now, just setting up, the difference between setting up a wallet and doing what you just described versus, setting up a bank account for a business, which literally still takes weeks often. It's crazy. It's just like unbelievable. And often doesn't work for various reasons. So,
especially if you're a crypto company, it's like.
Especially if you're a crypto company, yeah, absolutely.
So when you were introducing yourself to me, as in like when we were discussing what we were going to say at the top of the show, you said an interesting thing. You said that you are also the chief stoic at Figment. Like why stoicism?
Why stoicism? So, I think there's a probably in many circles, although not all of them. I live in the middle of America, so this may not be entirely true, but there's kind of a default position, at least in the cities we're familiar with living in, and the environments probably many of us on the podcast are living in. Assumption there is that we're pretty we're kind of atheist, basically. We're kind of secular. And I'm not convinced that humans ever are. I think we'll just find our religion and call it something else in some other way, and our own beliefs and our own rituals, etc. So, I used to believe that we could just, survive on being entirely rational. And I'm kind of gone post-rational at this point. And so I think Stoicism just offers an opportunity to sort of look at something larger than yourself, but also be involved in the real world. And then, it's very practical from, the ups and downs of life, of startup life in particular, but, life in general. I think, it's everyone has their own struggle, whether objectively it's a struggle or not. Everyone certainly feels that struggle, and so I think it's just a good way of remaining calm through the storms. But yet not also, people always it's just a detached philosophy. You don't really care. Like what you've just managed to do is not care. But I think if you look at and have spent some time, and I'm by no means an expert, and I'm certainly an amateur in anything I talk about, but the Stoics were certainly involved in society and life, and had a sense of purpose while remaining somewhat detached, which I think is, if you can get that balance right, which is always, it's easy to be a Stoic when things are going well. Like, of course I'm a Stoic. It is great, but I think it's the time when it can be useful when things aren't going well. And so that's why I kind of like it. So it's I feel like it's a religion that I can get behind. It's not real religion, it's a philosophy. I realize that, but it feels like close enough that you can have some beliefs that are bigger than yourself, be involved in the world without having it throw you around on a daily basis.
That's a really interesting idea, especially in the crypto markets, right? Like when things change so quickly, if you can be stoic about your emotional response to things, it allows you to think more strategically and more logically about things. Yeah, definitely.
I think it's good. And we, and here we have I would say the average age probably, we have 60 employees, I think, as of this week at Figment. And I would say probably the average age is under 30. And I'm, not quite double that, but getting there, and so I think having someone who can remain calm when people are making mistakes, and, hey, mistakes are they're a present, they're a gift, as long as you do it once and don't do it again. So look at it that way rather than like sort of hair on fire and panicking. So I also sort of think kind of one of my jobs is to calm people down when the world, and crypto is always crazy, right? It's 24/7, it's always crazy. So if you can kind of like just take a deep breath, it's going to be okay. If something's gone wrong, try to learn from it. And if things are going right, then don't get too excited either, because it's going to change tomorrow, and enjoy it a little bit, basically.
So what was the thing that you guys saw in 2018 that made you decide to create Figment?
Yeah, so it wasn't a straight line from sort of idea to execution, and they rarely ever are. But we had sold our last company a couple of years prior, and we had our CTO Matt had a intellectual interest in the technology. Was doing some mining in his garage, and we were like, this looks pretty cool. Maybe we should start thinking about doing something in this area. And when you sort of put our background together in large networks, large data centers, cloud security. Our third co-founder had a cloud database startup. You kind of get staking when you put that skill set together. And so we were looking to get into an area that we thought we could, have a fair start with other people who had been in the space longer, and it really matched our background. And yes, though, we looked at proof of work mining and Bitcoin mining, but for a whole host of reasons. But almost one primarily is it wasn't that intellectually interesting. It's big data centers, cheap power, cheap internet, and we affectionately call it like chicken coop hosting. It's like not that interesting, like just from an intellectual perspective. I didn't get excited about that. So this is not, but before the maximalists yell at me, this is not an attack on Bitcoin. This is I just don't want to be a Bitcoin miner for those reasons. So, right. But I own Bitcoin. I love Bitcoin. But don't take it that way. But
don't be scared of the maxis. Don't be scared of the maxis, Lorien.
Maxis. I know. I'll be stoic about it. Okay. I just don't want to be a Bitcoin miner. It just doesn't sound like fun. And so, staking was just, we were starting to get our first staking networks launch. Ethereum at that, the community was starting to talk about it seriously. And so we're like, here's an area where we might even have a little bit of advantage, and we can sort of build a large scaled offering pretty well and figure it out along with everyone else. So that's how we started there, and started on one protocol, and now we're close to 50 of them. And I think most of the major layer 1, layer 2 launches in the last 3 years have been some form of a proof of stake consensus mechanism. So
sure. I mean, this is what we use as well, right? So like it's
right.
I think that there's lots of good reasons for picking it. It has some disadvantages, especially around sort of like concentration of stake and the ability for it to turn into a plutocracy and all that kind of stuff. And those I think are still not completely solved issues just for proof of stake in general, but versus the impact it has environmentally and all of the other stuff, I think that it's still the better choice.
Right. Yeah. And so, you can have different perspectives on whether the environmental concerns around Bitcoin are rational or not. Leaving that aside, there are people who view, there's lots of things we do that kind of other people don't value and use a lot of electricity. And we don't usually, ask like how much electricity does that consume? Regardless of where you fall out on that question, I think there's something about proof of stake, which is like fundamentally more, that makes it very interesting, which is that the participants in the network can actually participate in maintaining the blockchain itself. So you can actually benefit by, whereas, the miners capture all the new block value in Bitcoin, whether, as a holder of Bitcoin, you don't really benefit in that. Whereas in proof of stake, I think there's and maybe we'll see if this actually happens, but you have a longer term alignment of interest. And since as a token holder, you can actually benefit in producing the next block, directly, either, running your own staking node or using something like us or however you do it. So I think that's just like, actually interesting. When we started, I think there was an open question about whether it would work at all. So one of our risks, when we would talk to, when we were raising our seed round, like, well, it's never been done at scale. We could just all figure out proof of stake doesn't work and it's bad because these 4 networks were forked and whatever. And so, oops, well, then we don't have a business. But I think we're, still not 10 years, but it's 3.5. And there haven't been any sort of major blowups around, that are at least related to the consensus mechanism itself. So I think that's promising. And, I think the ETH transition has gone better than it would expected and maybe even a little quicker once we started. So I think that's promising. And I think that would be a big inflection point. So if it works for ETH, it'll work for everyone. So.
And like, just for the people who sort of may never have used a staking service, like why, how does a staking service work in principle, and how do you think about things like security of people's tokens? Because obviously you are running, because you are staking on people's behalves, there's at least on some networks, there's this possibility of making a mistake and getting slashed. So like, I'd love to know more about that.
So everything I'm going to say is going to be caveated by each proof of stake protocol is a little bit different.
Yep.
And so there are edge cases where what I say won't be true or will be different by a degree. But in general, the first thing you should know about when you choose a staking provider is it's non-custodial. And what I mean by that is the staking provider doesn't actually control your private keys and can't actually move your assets. So staking is an on-chain contract. You can think of it as giving the staking provider authority on your behalf to participate in consensus and maintaining the ledger. So the staking provider, can't run away with your funds or can't be hacked and lose your funds. So that's kind of the first thing to know with 95% of the staking protocols out there. That's how they're designed, or at least the newer ones. Where things can go wrong, your staking provider can not have great uptime, and you can miss some rewards. So it's not the end of the world. It's important, but and some of the protocols are very strict about that. Some of them are, you'd have to be a really bad operator to be down long enough to have that, for your customers to miss rewards. Now, we come out of the enterprise data center space and cloud security space. So, we run physical bare metal. We're old enough to actually pull blue cables. We were like, well, that's a skill no one needs anymore. You can just spin up a node on AWS, but it actually became handy. So we do run physical data centers in what's known as bare metal, which is the actual servers themselves. And then we use a mix of cloud providers. So there's some benefits, some security cost reasons for doing that. I don't go into that, but so that helps for on the uptime basis. And then, you talked about slashing, and slashing is essentially, it's the worst thing you can do on a proof of stake network. It's the equivalent of forking a network or trying to spend a token twice. It's not like technically correct what I'm saying, but that's why slashing is bad. That's why the penalties can be severe. But even in the slashing environment, you're not losing the amount you stake. There may be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 percentage points of what you stake that would be lost if your provider double signs. Now, I'm not minimizing that. It's horrible. We do everything. The whole company is optimized around not having that not happen. Our SLAs, our insurance policies, our DevOps, like everything we do is basically around never double signing, no matter what. If everything blows up, that's the one thing that doesn't happen.
So let's just break that down a little bit for the people who may not know what slashing is.
Yeah.
So on a proof of stake network, if you what you're essentially doing is you're putting your money up against a node that is running consensus, and the reason that the network is being secured is if that node is dishonest, then your stake that you've basically placed against the node to make sure from a game theory perspective you are being honest, your stake can be cut, can be slashed, can be broken by the consensus protocol. And the most common way of doing this, or the worst thing you can do on a proof of stake network, is double spending. And the way that you double spend is signing the same transaction to two different outputs, two different wallets at the same time.
That's right. And so what the few times that it has happened, not to us, to other providers, is and the thing that, if you're looking to space, you want to and you care about that, what you should is to do a little due diligence. Is how does the provider prevent that from happening? And leaving aside bad intent, so we'll assume that the providers have good intent. The way that it has happened in the past by other providers is that you have a cloud-based backup of your signing keys and your signing node and the validator node, and then your primary cloud goes down. So you're like, oh, not a big deal. I'll just bring up the cloud on the second one. However, you can't access the first one, and inevitably it's going to come back up on its own, and now you have two of the exact same keys trying to sign a transaction, and therefore you now. And so what you want to do is be very careful about your automatic fail-safe and downtime procedures. So in our case, we always have, we literally have, you need to unplug something. You actually can't bring up a backup unless there's manual intervention. So there's no automatic recovery on our side. It requires someone to take something offline physically, literally unplug it from the internet, and then bring up the second node as a backup.
So basically your failover is automatic, but then your fail back or your recovery is manual.
That's right. That's right. Okay. So so it always requires someone, or even, that's exactly it. Even the HSMs, to be a little technical, the things that hold the keys, we make sure that the one that's not working is unplugged from the internet and cannot come back on, basically. So sometimes being too automated, there are people who have tried to over automate that, and that's where you got into trouble. So sometimes, again, running your own servers in a data center you control does have benefits.
So over the course of the 3.5 years you guys have been doing staking and running this infrastructure, what are the things that you think you did well? What are the things you think you've had learning experiences from?
Yeah, so we ended up when you count test nets and main nets, providing services on close to 50 proof of stake blockchains. That's a lot, and how we got here was, I'd like to say we were smart and we planned this, and it was going to become competitive mode, but essentially we couldn't predict which ones would win. And so we had a fairly simple heuristic of, was it a scam? No. Does it have a real team involved in it? Are there real investors? Is there a plausible thesis and idea behind this blockchain on why it might work? And we're like, okay, so it passes those tests, then we should provide infrastructure. We should be on its testnet. We should launch with it. And we realized we weren't smart enough to see what the multi-chain universe looks like in 10 years. So how do we pick the winners? And what if we miss 2 or 3 of the winners? Then kind of the whole business is screwed. So we basically said, okay, well, we know how to manage complex networks. So let's just get on everything that matters, basically. And so subsequently, it's become a competitive differentiator because each one of these networks is a little bit different. They're kind of complicated to scale. You need to sort of have a fairly robust DevOps environment, et cetera. So I would say that, from a competitive differentiator, that has definitely become, we serve mostly institutional clients. That's definitely been a benefit in that if there's a proof of stake blockchain, then that matters, we'll support it. So you have one place you can go for that. But it wasn't strategic. It was just, we kind of got there by mistake, not because we were smart. So in fact, the opposite, because we weren't that smart. So that's how we got there on that front. So I would say that's one decision that worked well. The other one I would sort of say that, we've perennially underestimated the adoption and growth of some of these blockchains and the amount and the numbers that we're launching. So I'm still surprised by the number of layer 1 and layer 2 protocols launching. I would have thought it would have slowed down a little bit, and it really isn't. And there are still really interesting, well-capitalized, great founding team projects launching, after a year where a lot launched last year. And I would have been wrong on that bet. And so just from scaling the business, it always feels like we're a little bit behind. Hopefully we'll catch up in the next couple of months from a hiring perspective, et cetera. If you're looking into the space, we're hiring. I'm sorry, a little pitch. We'll
no,
talk
absolutely.
to you. But across multiple areas of the business. But yeah, I think I've sort of underestimated sort of the variety and the iteration that people are seeing. People see, okay, these are the problems, these launched, here are the problems. I think we have a way to fix it. And so I think probably we have another year or two of more interesting protocols launching. I think eventually it has to stop, and we need to actually start building developer communities. But we've been surprised by that. So
it's really interesting. And so you got the staking side of things.
Right.
So Radix, for example, has I know different networks do it in different ways. The way that you stake is you have in your wallet, you can see, or on the Explorer, you can see the list of all the validators that are available to stake to, and you can stake to those validators, or you can spin up your own node and you can stake on your own node. And then within a certain threshold, and on the first version of the Radix network, it's the top 100, and sort of in subsequent versions that opens up to more nodes. So it sort of becomes a bit of a contest from the point of view of which node does the average staker want to stake to, and then there's the other side of things, which is you were talking about institutionals, where they're like, no, we want to have a relationship with our customers, with the people who are going to be providing the infrastructure for staking. Like examples of that are things like custodians or exchanges or hedge funds and things like that. Did you have a specific go-to-market strategy for a subsection of the network, or have you kind of done everything and found that a particular customer type is better for you?
Yeah, so staking is permissionless, which means you can stake with anyone.
Right.
You can't hide it. They're public nodes, and so we do have small individual stakers. We're happy to accept those, but we built the business basically around institutional B2B investors, and we define those, largely as large token holders on large changes from network to network who have a long-term interest in the network. They're not looking to just flip the token. They don't want to hold it for a couple months, but they are long-term invested. And I mean the general word of invested in the network, and they have a fairly large holding. And so they want someone who can help them with research, with doing the governance. We have a governance group of 7 people who spend most of their time participating in governance in these communities, which is like a unique feature of these proof of stake blockchain. It's super cool. You have on-chain and off-chain governance mechanisms, and this is how they're going to iterate and improve. And so, your average token holder doesn't want to do that, or it's very time-consuming and difficult. So we basically built the business around serving those needs, SLAs, insurance, contracts, support, etc. Whereas, a consumer basically, may not need all those things, may not want those things. They just want to know they can get their, 10% return, 12% return, and there's some of the email if they have questions. So it's we've really built it around that larger token holder, and they're often VC funds, and as you pointed out, custodians and exchanges, and we think asset managers, more traditional asset managers, who are going to be looking for crypto yield savings going forward. We think that's probably the next wave. So
that's really interesting. And then and then there's another part of your business which is APIs for developers.
Yeah, right. So you think, okay, you're serving institutional token holders. How did you get there? But we sort of sat down after a year and said, well, why are these networks going to be worth anything? Beyond speculation, beyond some stable coins, leaving aside DeFi, what is going to build value on these protocols over time? And the way we answer that question is people have to be using them in applications or other use cases and having external value capture. Otherwise, the staking business isn't going to be worth anything, frankly, because the networks aren't going to be worth anything. So, because no one's using them for anything. Right. So, again, we don't think we're smart enough to figure out what those applications are, or we didn't think you were smart enough, but how can we help the people who are build on these protocols? And so, interacting with these blockchains, many of which are kind of beta software, they work, they function, but it's very difficult to read, to write, to search the data. You think Open Ledger, it's just there, you can get the data, but the data structures are all messed up. If you're running an application, it's hard to find what happened in this address over this time. So essentially, like, okay, well, let's see if we can help developers build their applications without having to worry about all that stuff going on in the blockchain. So that's how we basically said, okay, let's provide the tools to the people who are going to build amazing applications. They're going to sort of realize this better internet that we want to see realized. And that came out to a set of developer tools that, abstracts away your need to manage a node and how you read, write, research, and how you pull specific data sets off these blockchains. And then we were like, okay, well, those are cool. And so we did that, and we're like, okay, well, we think there's all these Web 2 developers who are kind of crypto curious. What is this thing? How do I start building on it? Where do I start? So then we're like, okay, well, how do we get more developers, not just, who are already building on, Ethereum, and maybe you're looking at the needs of a different blockchain or something like that, but how do we actually bring in developers into the space? Because that's what's going to add value over the long term. And so we have this Learn product. We don't make any money on it, but essentially we partner with the foundations and the ecosystems. And if you're a Web 2 developer and you're like, how do I create my first smart contract and deploy it? You can come here. We have tutorials. You can earn a few native tokens in the blockchain you're interested in. There's a community of 3,000 or 4,000 other developers who are building tutorials, and it will help you. So we have a very active Discord channels where if you're like, what am I doing? There's a very helpful community there, and I'm really just starting at the hobbyist level. And if you looked at all the big computing revolutions, they've always started with the hobbyists. You don't usually start with the enterprises first. You start with people in their basement who are like, this is freaking cool. And I'm cool because I'm on it before everyone else. And so we've really tried to hit that audience because we think that's where we are. And if we can help those people deploy their first smart contract, then maybe when they have their own great idea and start up, they'll use our API services. So that's the thing behind that. That's
a real long-term play, but we've come exactly to exactly the same conclusion when it comes to building a developer ecosystem. When I got into Ethereum, when it first launched, I can remember the community that I met in London were there not because they wanted to make loads of money. That wasn't the main motivation. It was just because it was fun.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest downfalls of Ethereum today is a lot of people are like, Ethereum isn't fun anymore. What you have to build, there's so much pressure around it. There's so much money running around, and the likelihood of getting hacked high, the amount of stress that's involved in it's high, and it's sort of lost some of that core. But if you can find a community of people where it isn't about the money, it's about just learning and experimenting. I think that is where the next generation of stuff is going to come out of. So
and community, and it's around kind of as we're sort of again started kind of maybe take it a step too high, but we're fairly atomized. So if you can find these communities of like-minded individuals who aren't yelling at you, and you can actually try to build and work out problems, and you know what, this blockchain is actually, I can do this. This is really, really amazing. I couldn't do that in this environment. So that's, we're really trying to build that community, and those are the, and arguably, Ethereum's strength has been its developer community. It's not the specifics of the protocol itself, I would argue. It may become that, but I would really say it's the strength of the developer community. And so I think you have to start there.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
yeah.
And so this, is that the only thing that the APIs are for, to like help people learn more about Web3 and like get Web2 developers up and running, or is there like
that's the Learn.
Okay.
That's similar. Coinbase has something called Earn, where
Yeah.
where you can use something similar on traditional blockchains. But no, that's the Learn product. But then the API services, really, we call it DataHub. Not the greatest name in the world, it's okay. DataHub, and then we have another product.
It's functional. Describes what it does.
It's functional. We have another one called Hubble, which is our, you can actually you can think of it as like a block explorer for proof of stake blockchains, and Hubble's better. Like Hubble, I get it because it's kind of a data product, and you can, Hubble's just cool. But anyway, so DataHub has essentially, all the stuff that you need to do to run an application with a couple lines of API code. So whether it's read, whether it's write, search, archive nodes, and then we have these data indexers, which if you need to provide, pull specific data sets off, we structure it for you basically. So those are the actual developer tools. And then the first thing I was speaking of is something called Learn, which again, we don't charge for. It's free. It's just something, again, that we really want to try to like invest in the community and do our part in building that. So.
Interesting. And let's change topics for the last segment and just talk a little bit about what like is happening with Ethereum. I think that a lot of people are not familiar. Like everyone knows that Ethereum's transitioning to proof of stake, but like not that many people actually know exactly where it is right now and like what the timeline for it is, and like what are you guys doing for the transition to proof of stake as well?
So there's a couple, actually, there's kind of two interesting things going on in Ethereum. There's a whole set of that is kind of part of, but not entirely connected to the move to proof of stake. So the move to proof of stake is happening. We're in a kind of an interim stage where there is, I haven't looked at the most recent numbers, but a significant, double-digit percentage of Ethereum is locked up in, essentially, you can think of it as kind of a test network, not really. And once it's reached a certain threshold, you could start doing the full conversion. It's very complicated. Like no one's ever done a move from proof of work to proof of stake at this scale. So the way they've done it is it's through a set of transitory phases rather than just flicking a switch. But this first stage of that, where a number of people have essentially moved their tokens onto this proof of stake Ethereum network and have locked them up until the full merge is done. And that's done, I think, probably better than expected. Nothing bad has really happened. More people participated than anticipated. And so you're looking at, it's Ethereum, so I'm kind of loath to pick a date, but probably next 3 to 9 months, we'll be making the merge and then it'll fully switch over. Now, there's also another track of a set of protocol and incentive changes that I think are really, really meaningful and maybe have sort of fallen, outside of the Ethereum community, have kind of flown under the radar there. And it's essentially around, we're all aware of the gas fees and how high they've been in the past, and the gas fees go to the miners. Well, there's a set of, to not go into too much in the weed detail, but essentially will result in the gas fees being burnt in general.
Yeah.
So
EIP 1559.
That's right, and so that will have a constrictive price on supply while keeping, and then there's some other like protocol design which essentially limit the prices of gas. So while there's seems they think they found a way to manage the competition for block space, which is essentially what gas is reflective of, in such a way that you can keep a downward pressure on gas prices while also constraining the supply of Ethereum from a price perspective. So I think those are actually in some ways a little bit more, from our business, not as interesting, because obviously it's a big opportunity for us as this transition happens. But I think just from a protocol design and an economic design, I think it's really, really meaningful. And I've slowly become, again, late to the party, but more of an Ethereum bull less because of the proof of stake transition, though important, and more because of these changes
Yeah, I
over
mean,
the last 6 months.
It's funny. Like we've had Radix has had EIP, the equivalent of EIP 1559 in its specification for like years. And like when I saw Vitalik talk at a conference in like 2016 or 2017 where he was railing against this idea of a bidding auction.
Was he? Okay.
Bidding, right. No, not about 1559, but about this idea of a bidding auction for gas prices. Like he never wanted that as a permanent solution because he like, you know, Vlad and Vitalik have talk at length all the time about the, you know, game theoretically perfect pricing mechanisms and like first price auctions being proven to be a bad idea for that and second price auctions being better and all this kind of stuff. So it's good to see that all of that, like, it's funny how long this like theoretical stuff takes to end up actually ending up in these. But yeah, like the gas price war is one in which only, you know, miners and node validators win in, which actually leads me to my final question, which is, what is your opinion on MEV, maximum extractable value, sort of strategies? And is it something that you guys do or plan to do at all?
Yeah, so I'm going to confess that we haven't thought about it extensively outside of the current environment. So I'm not dodging the question. I really don't think we considered it a little bit. I will say that, you know, it's going to be interesting to see. I've listened to some people talk about some, in theory, you know, collusive behavior between miners that could happen and the reasons why it might or might not happen. I mean, you know, at this stage, we're just trying to get the infrastructure right. And certainly have not even like, other than like listening to some podcasts, even considered if that's possible and what it would mean. And I've also heard arguments like there's a whole bunch of reasons why just, you know, this won't work. There's a whole bunch of incentives why it won't work. We'll see. You know, I think how the tipping function works, you know, the tipping of the transaction works in reality will have a really, like, there's a lot of speculation. It'll be interesting to see. I'm curious to see how that'll work. You know, but in the end, no, leaving aside sort of our role in that, it also becomes to people's willingness to stake their tokens, right? Because it essentially, you know, there's a price for doing that around liquidity. And so will the tipping fees be enough for people to justify that versus some other use? And that'll be interesting to see. So I don't know. But good question. I'd say, can we revisit it in 6 months or 9 months?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, let's do it in 9 months / post when Ethereum staking goes live, and then we can have a conversation about like whether or not this is important. So it's been to watch. Lorien, it's been such a pleasure to have you on. If people want to find out more about Figment, where should they go?
We're in all the standard places, figment.io. Find us on Telegram too, and on Twitter. So that's where we communicate. And,
is it just /Figment on Twitter?
Figment.io. Yep, that's Figment.io. So sometimes if you type it wrong, you'll get the Disney dragon. That wasn't the reason we named it Figment. Did you know there was a Disney character that was a purple dragon?
No.
Either did we. Until someone typed in, one of the employees was like, hey, what are you guys like, big fan of Figment the dragon? I'm like, what? So, no, we just chose Figment because, like, you know, at that time, is it real? It's kind of ephemeral. Is this blockchain real? It's in the cloud. So maybe it's all just a figment of your imagination. Maybe it is. It's the red pill option. But so that's how we got there. So it's not the dragon. It's the blockchain infrastructure company. Oh, the dragon's great though. So
I mean, like the fact that there is a dragon, you now have a mascot.
There is a dragon.
Disney will probably.
It's one of the secondary Disney characters. So I'm wondering if there'll be a revival at some point, and then all of a sudden we'll get a bunch of traffic coming to our site because there's, you know, Figment the Dragon movie. We'll benefit from that. So if they need to bring back Figment, so we'll see.
That is better than what we get. So like Radix is for some reason in Eastern Europe like was really popular for naming alcoholic spirits. So there's like Radix wine and like Radix
that's cool.
vodka.
That's cooler. That's actually great. That's fantastic. It sounds like a UFC, something to do with the UFC too. Like there'd be some mixed martial arts or something like that. It's
in the red corner, Radix.
Exactly. That's it. So you've got alcohol and fighters. So that's better than a purple dragon. Take that.
I don't know. Debatable. Anyway, it's been wonderful to have you. Thank you so much for your time. And looking forward to speaking again in 9 months' time.
Likewise. Take care.